All right. Welcome to this particular episode of Challenge. Can you fix Nigeria? I have with me today Mr. Adeola Adeyanju, who is the MD and CEO of Synod Resources Nigeria. Mr. Adeyanju, welcome to this discussion.
Mr. Kitayo, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm definitely, like I said to some of our volunteers, you are certainly one of the our speakers that we always want to have on this discussion. So thank you for sparing time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. Today we are discussing on housing, and I wanted us to just look at some of the issues around housing in Nigeria, and I'll give you a very quick background of where I'm coming from. If you look at one of the things that really baffles me when you look at it in Nigeria is the fact that we built quite a lot of houses, which are in the range of 50 million, 100 million, particularly if you come to Lekki, VI, Ikoyi access, And now, over time, you see that a lot of those houses are empty. Nobody's able to take them. There's so many of them that are empty, people tying a lot of capital into it. Whereas, for me, the way I see it, my expectation is that Nigeria should be doing a lot of low-cost housing. What is your experience with housing in Nigeria?
So it's interesting that you mentioned Lekki and the expensive houses, as I like to call them, vis-a-vis the earning power of Nigerians. But I would tell you a story. Some years back, I was in Katsina while I was still Chief Marketing Officer for Itana.
Yeah.
We had gone to Katsina to look at opportunity for some projects there. And as we drove out from the airport, I saw these lovely green bungalows. There were 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom bungalows that were laid out on a very wide stretch, maybe 300, 500 of those units. But they were all empty. So I said to the guy from the State House that came to pick us up at the airport, I said to him, what is the problem? He said, it's interesting that the state government built those houses, but people have refused to move in there because they prefer to live in their community homes.
Wow. Okay. So what you're saying to me is that this is not necessarily a cost issue.
Thank you. That's the point I was going to make. There's a mismatch of property and the people, depending on different communities. So yes, the Lekki problem is value, is expensive. But as the Katsina experience taught me, is that maybe there's not enough conversation also happening with people, even when government wants to build low-cost houses.
Help them. So the stakeholder engagement itself is not good from the start.
No. Because the people are saying, look, we live in communities of our families have land, they have homes. We're not going to leave that.
Come and build for us there.
That's it.
It's a completely different perspective that you've given me on this issue. And I really like that, because I tell you what, my expectation, and I mean, like you, traveling around the world, you see what happens in Europe, the issue of social housing. So for example, if you were going to develop a new property in Europe and you're building an estate, the government will say to you, okay, develop your estate, but maybe 1/3 of it or 1/4 of them must be for low-cost people who can buy into that estate. And what I see in those kind of situations then is that the government, the guy who's financing it, and the community themselves get engaged and say, okay, who is buying it and that kind of thing. So what you're saying to us now then is that we should get the stakeholders, people are going to buy, people are going to construct together. But how can we do that?
Okay. So it goes back to the question of why you have the Lekki mismatch or the Ikoyi, because if you go to Ikoyi, it's the same story. They've got lovely high rises that have been empty for years. Because as I said, the Nigerian problem in terms of housing is not acquisition, it's not ownership.
Okay.
It's affordability. For a country where more than 60% of people live below the poverty line, we're not talking about ownership now. Forget that one. Or even in terms of affordability, earning power of people cannot even sustain a rental or a mortgage or whatever on these properties. And the genesis of that problem for Lagos at least, is the government. You cannot sell land or charge all these exorbitant taxes and all of that on land and expect people to build cheap accommodation on it. The numbers don't make sense. The numbers don't make sense. If you build the smallest property in Lekki Axis, the cost of survey to Lagos State alone is almost ~1 million naira.
Just
you haven't done anything. Just survey. It's almost ~1 million naira. Now, that land, the owner of that land has had to pay all sorts of levies, all sorts of fees, all sorts of whatever, before he even started construction. Then you come into a country where we don't manufacture steel, it is imported. So that is dependent on international pricing and all of those things. The one that we have in abundance is essentially a monopoly cement.
Yes.
Where if you imported cement into Nigeria, it would land at a fraction of the cost of locally produced cement. A single company, a single individual has the rights for it and prices it accordingly. If the demand for cement goes up, the price will go up. It's totally crazy. So the opportunities or the chances for getting affordable houses in Nigeria on the private side of things is slim to none.
It's slim to none.
Because the reality is, I mean, I have friends who are developers. I have relationship with some other developers that I've spoken to people extensively. And contrary to popular expectation, the margins on even these 50 million houses for them, it's not as significant as people assume.
As people think. I see.
It's not.
But okay then. But Ade, if this is the case, yeah, you look at a few years ago. I remember Governor Fashola in Lagos had this project on Iluberi. Yes. Do you understand? And
absolutely,
give or take, there must be at least 200 housing units there. I've not counted it myself, but it's a big project. I saw that. Now, the question is, why can't government do more? I mean, everywhere you go in Lagos, for example, you have a jack on the estate. When those estates were built,
yes,
you understand, they were built for middle-class people, civil servants. They were not built for high-end. So why did that policy change? And when government went to an Ilubiri, for example, why did they fail there? Why couldn't they complete that job, in your opinion?
So I mean, the shift in that policy was because government decided they didn't have enough resources to engage in building houses while developing other infrastructure. So the public-private partnership looked like a good way to go. Now you can't fault that thinking. The thinking itself is not faulty.
Okay.
But I think that if government must do a government-private partnership, it has to be with private partners that understand the government welfarist approach. So this is not for profit. So even if you do make profit, it's going to be very, very, very slim.
Limited, okay.
So the government should then say, look, we're providing land and we need properties delivered on this to this amount.
It cannot exceed this amount. Okay.
It cannot exceed that, but that's not what I see. I mean, as you come out of Lekki Phase 1, second gate, there is a Lagos State property that has just been completed there. And those properties were sold for 60 million naira a unit. That is the state government.
State government?
That is the government.
Million.
Because it's a government-private, the private guy is going to tell you based on what we have even had to pay you as Lagos State, this is the least we can do.
The numbers is going to come down to, yeah.
So I think that in terms of public, in terms of mass housing, the approach has to change. Take, for instance, the National Housing Fund provides a 50 million loan to people to say, okay, go and buy a property. More often than not, the people who can access that 15 million naira facility don't want to live in the places where 15 million naira, you can buy a house for 15 million naira.
I see. So the policy again is not matching the reality on the ground.
Again, my take is that if NHF, for instance, wanted to maximize that facility, rather than give people 15 million in terms of the loan, NHF should be looking for builders or people, property developers, and say, look, I want to develop a mass estate. And each unit cannot exceed 15 million in terms of what we will deliver to people.
Exactly.
So essentially what they are delivering to people is property, not money. Because from that 15 million, if I even have to buy any kind of land from it,
it's
so
all
the
gone.
fundamental assumption is that I must own land for that. So how many people can afford even that land in the first place? That becomes a prerequisite to getting even the 15 million.
15 million on top of it. I see your point. Yeah, but you see, you see, this is where I struggle. You're right. I agree with you completely. But this is where I also struggle because I looked at the development of Orange Island in Lagos, for example. Yeah, 3,000 square meters. You look at Eco Atlantic, how big that is. It's a lot of money, okay? And I'm thinking, like you're saying, that why can't we just deliver that kind of land, yeah, that kind of parcel of land, and then use that for middle cost development? Why is that policy failing? I'll tell you where I'm going with this. I can't remember a government in Nigeria now that's had a proper housing policy as their policy since the Second Republic. If you remember Shagari in the Second Republic, their symbol was a house. You know, they used to call them one nation. And the policy of that government was to deliver low-cost housing to people. It was a federal government policy. Now, so why is it that we don't have, is it that we don't take this housing problem, this housing deficit serious, or what, why is it that we don't have specific policies targeting this issue?
Okay, I mean, data. As far back as 2012, 17 million housing units deficits. That was 2017. Nigerian population was about 167 million people. 2019, with 200 million people, that deficit is estimated at about 22 million. Ooh. Now, if you consider that some of even the existing housing that we see today are not fit for purpose,
are no longer fit.
Some things some of the things people live in, no human being should live in them. You realize that that deficit is a lot more significant than the numbers that we're looking at. Because at a deficit of 22 million people, you're assuming 10 people per household. If you are going to look at the population of 200 million. So we'll say, yeah, fair, daddy, mommy, one auntie, one
uncle somewhere, yes.
Yes, it's a full house, 10 people. So 22 million deficits. Now, what I have seen, you mentioned Ilubiri at some point. Ilubiri started about 10 years ago.
Correct.
Actual construction started about 8 years or thereabout ago. Now, post-Fashola, a new governor in the same party came on and decided to frustrate that old project. Instead, he started shopping around for new developers to partner on his own building projects. There are two reasons why you think that would happen in Nigeria. Number one is that the new administration thinks that there are benefits to be derived from starting a new project.
Okay.
Or two, you don't want the previous person who started a project to take the glory, because even if you complete it, somebody would say, oh, it was a Fashola project, irrespective of the fact that you want Una. So for me, I think that's that inability for government to see itself as a continuum.
Okay.
Remains Nigeria's biggest problem as far as I see it, so that everybody wants what they can deliver in 4 years, and if they do a second term, in 8 years. Now, if you're going to do a national housing policy, you're looking at a 20-year type plan. It's not something that happens in overnight. 4 years.
Okay.
In 4 years, in most instances, you have not even completed the pre-build phase of work, the design, the environmental impact assessment, engagement of communities around where you're going to develop. All of those things take time. If you look at how long there have been conversations around how long it took to build Terminal 5 in the UK, when the conversation started 25 years ago, thereabouts, to when it was finally delivered. That is the nature of long-term mass projects.
Planning. I see. So continuum, a failure to run things as a continuum is an issue. Inconsistent policy, the fact that we're not matching stakeholders. I mean, we're not matching the projects, even the little projects we have, with the stakeholder needs. Those are some of the.
So you take from a builder's perspective, if I was a builder, the guys who got in bed with the last administration in Lagos State of Governor Ambody,
Yeah.
the thinking is that at least we would have 8 years to develop something. That government was gone in 4 years.
And then it was gone in 4 years. So again, that then, oh my word. Okay, I see.
So if you were a developer, you realize that the risk with doing business with government is significant, which means that your margin on those projects must also be significant to be commensurate with the risk. So here we are.
So
how does a government partnership deliver cheap or low-cost projects?
This is scary now. Because actually, the more you tell me this now, the more worried I am about it. So how can we fix it? And let me tell you why I'm saying this. I'm not familiar with housing in many places around Nigeria, but at least I can tell you about Lagos. And I know that there's a premium on land in Lagos, okay? I remember growing up in Akure, and when Ajashin was governor in Akure, he built Ala Estate, Alagbaka Estate, Ijapu Estate. They built massive, endless, 10,000 housing units. They delivered it in 4 years. You understand? Those guys used to do that. I mean, you and I have been to Singapore. We see what they do in Singapore. I mean, how government builds tower blocks for people, assign those things, people pay it off over 30 years, and they get it out. Can a system like that work in Nigeria? Because like you said a few minutes ago, some of the places that we actually call homes are not worthy of being called homes now. So there has to be something needs to give. Particularly, so what are your thoughts? Can we have that kind of arrangement in Nigeria?
Oh, I believe we can, but again, we have to be a bit more sincere and less selfish.
Okay.
There's a development somewhere close to Ajah that was done by New Towns Development, Lagos.
Okay.
And what then happened was after that, so there were blocks of flats that were built by Lagos State. And typically what happens is that by the time that project is done, Lagos State civil servants have shared it amongst themselves. So you've got one person owning 5, 6 of it, and then letting it out at market rates in terms of its rent. But the person bought a subsidized government property. And in the process, defeating the aim of that project in the first place. Because the people who still finally live in it are paying commercial rents. Because somebody sat as a middleman, hijacked the process. And so, but I honestly think that we can't get around these things. Lagos State has a proper database of taxpayers, for instance.
Correct.
Those taxpayers have unique IDs, whether it is BVN, whether it is national identity number, whatever.
Exactly, yeah.
They got some kind of unique number that based on that, you can say, look, guy, you got one before, you can't get another one again. So that you cannot get more than one in a lifetime.
Correct.
Because it has to start from that. Even whatever is built today will not get to people. The same set of people will get 10, will get 12, will get 20, and then go on to resell it for market rates.
Market rates. Okay. Now another thing. Let me take this discussion somewhere else now, because one of the things you also mentioned before was the cost of the raw materials. You know, even if you wanted to construct. So you mentioned the issue of the steel. That in most cases we're importing steel. Then you mentioned the fact that we have near to being a monopoly when it comes to things like cement. You understand?
That's right.
Yeah. So how can we also address those things? I mean, I remember there was a senior friend of ours who was in position of power in Ministry of Steel. And I used to say to them, look, people will not come and buy Nigerian steel. We don't have that brand in the market. The people that will buy Nigerian steel are Nigerian local consumers. So we need to have a policy that says buy Nigeria for Nigerian steel. So is building a house, how can we marry these two together?
To interrupt you, the interesting was that Nigerians actually prefer Nigerian steel. I spoke with builders who will tell you we prefer Nigerian steel. So it wasn't about people not wanting Nigerian steel. It was an inadequacy in the market. Ajaokuta, as we all know, failed woefully.
Okay.
So the other smaller steel rolling companies, I mean, there used to be one in my hometown in Elisha, Adidiro Steel Rolling Mill.
I remember that.
It's dead. So there were a few of them. I think there was one in Oshobo or something, if I remember correctly.
Yes, there's Oshobo still rolling, yes.
But those guys,
Ajakuta, Alaja, yeah.
Everybody needs the raw material that Ajakuta would have provided them, either in terms of metal ingots or something, that are all not available today. So the Ajakuta steel plan was brilliant. It was massive.
Correct.
Execution was flawed. And 10, 20 years down the line, we're paying the price for a poor execution.
For a poor execution. Because if you don't have steel, basically you can't build a country. I see.
That's the truth.
I see.
And I honestly think that if we do produce local steel, just like the people constantly talk about the gas play in Nigeria, it cannot be export focused. It must be looked at as a tool for industrialization. Absolutely.
I see.
So I would have no problem with the government subsidizing the production of steel, subsidizing the production of gas, because it would then be used as internal fuel to industrialize us as a people.
To build the economy up. I see.
For me, that has to be the approach. But in the short term, because there's no steel company that's going to show up in the next 4 years. So in the short term, I think that the government, for instance, has to remove import duty and stuff on things like steel.
So that they can at least come in for now. Yeah.
You have to see that something that is meant for nation building. There's nobody that will take steel to their house and eat it.
Okay. Yes.
Steel, the only way you can use steel is to use it in construction, in fabrication, or whatever. You're building something, whether it's road, whether it's factories, whatever it is. So instead of subsidizing, and I said this before, instead of subsidizing things like petrol importation, as a government, I will make leeways to give dollar at a subsidized rate to people who bring in steel.
To manufacture steel.
Huge nations. They're not consumer items. They are purely for industrial, they're purely for growth.
Very
with the
good
cement,
point.
I honestly think that with cement, government, just like you have in the US, when a corporation becomes too big, that it lacks competition, and by extension, becomes dangerous to consumers.
Correct.
There's an antitrust issue.
There's an antitrust issue there.
It has to be broken down, or competition has to be brought in. Nigeria has to move into an antitrust regime where commodities like cement that are critical to our development cannot be left as a monopoly or near
monopoly. A monopoly in the hand of one person or so. Very good point.
So if you must do monopoly, you must pay heavy tax to the government that is then used to subsidize that industry that you're monopolizing. But it cannot be that you're a monopoly, you get cheap dollar, it's totally unfair on the people.
On the people. I see. Fantastic. Mr. Adeola, those are very fantastic points. There's another issue that I wanted to raise and to size to get you what your take is on that now. Now, again, if you look at what it takes us to get paperwork, assume you buy a parcel of land. Let's even assume that you have the money and you buy a parcel of land now. To regularize the paperwork for that parcel of land, it will take, depending on which state you are in, will take you anywhere between 3 years to 10 years. I mean, in Lagos, where it's supposedly best, or at least is relatively easy or clear, it will still take you at least 3 years, to be able to get your paperwork. In other places, it could take you 10 years. So again, for me, I believe that kind of scenario again is impacting on how people can do things. Because if you don't have the paperwork anyway, you don't have title, you don't have property rights, you don't have title rights, it's difficult to get money from banks and things like that. Is there anything that we can also do to address this kind of issue? What are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I think the answer is simple. Automate. It's not just a land problem. I was at the Petroleum Summit for the Industry, I think at the beginning of 2019, January 2019, in Abuja. And part of the biggest complaints from the IOCs is the time it takes to do documentation with NNPC or
DPR.
With the ministry. It just takes forever. And these guys are saying, look, from the moment where we commit funds to, say, an acreage, to where we actually can take possession of it, there's too much value lost in monies that just sit doing nothing with you guys. While you are busy doing paperwork, sometimes there's a change of administration,
And you start again.
All over again. So with lands in particular in Lagos, despite the claims of automation, and so the amount of time you're saying is slightly better in Lagos is because we claim we have automated. But automation means less human inputs.
Correct.
Less human input means less human interface. Correct. People want human interface.
Yes, they because want human interface for their own that's where something will drop, basically. Yeah.
Absolutely. So even when it has been put in a system, somebody will still expect you to come and see them to click on a button so that thing moves to the next desk.
Oof. Okay, so bottom line this for me, Mr. Adeola. If you were in a position today, I mean, they appoint you housing minister for Nigeria. How can we tackle this task? Let's summarize, let's converge. How can we tackle this housing thing? Summarize for us, please.
I think the first thing I will do is change the Nigerian Housing Fund model.
Okay.
Like I mentioned before, we will change it from giving funds to actually delivering properties within that budget. Yeah.
Okay.
The second thing, and you touched on it, and developer. You must also develop commensurate low-end property. It's not different from the way the discos. So if you got a Lagos as a disco, you are required to also get a low-end place in terms of revenue.
Correct.
As a disco to also service. Because otherwise, everybody wants to be in Lagos, be in Port Harcourt, be in Abuja, be in the manufacturing capitals. So you require legislature to ensure that those other people are not disenfranchised.
They are not disenfranchised. I see.
Today, the government, every time there's conversation around legislature, is always towards putting pressure on landlords. Lower your rents, collect your rent on monthly basis, but in reality, something led to the landlords collecting the kinds of rents that they are collecting.
Correct.
Why not address
that fundamentals? As well. I see.
Because the government today, any government in Nigeria has no moral justification to tell anybody to take less rents.
Because they've not created the enabling environment for that in the first place.
2 years ago, or 2.5, 3 years ago, the former governor, somebody woke up one day and said increasing land use charge by 400%. Is there anything anybody is doing in this country that in terms of return has grown by 400%? But you're going to wake up one morning and say, we're increasing land use charge by 400%. Who does that? So if I was minister, again, so legislature in terms of enforcing development of low-cost housing. If you're a developer and you want to get you want to be able to do your high-end stuff. So if you're building in Ikoyi, you must also be building
Alagbado. Somewhere, yes, I see.
Literally. Yes. And within Alagbado, as Lagos State will provide you the land so that there's no cost.
There's no story that you don't have the land. Yeah.
And we're saying develop properties of, no, there's not that stop Lagos from designing those prototypes of the houses so that you know how much it will cost. So when you tell the developer, develop this prototype at this amount in Alagbado, 200 units of it, and then you can build in Lekki. It's that simple.
It's that simple.
So you know you're going to get extremely low margins on the properties in Alagbado, but you will make up for it.
But you address, you make your profit in Ikoyi. I see.
That's how it works.
Good.
So in terms of legislation, that needs to change. The government needs to put its weight behind truly providing low-cost housing. Today, it is lip service as far as I'm concerned. There's no sincere desire.
Mr. Adeyanju, it's really been a pleasure discussing this topic with you. Thank you so much for your time. We'll come back with you to speak with you in the coming weeks. We are picking on very, very few challenges that we see in the Nigerian environment, and we're discussing with people like yourself. Thank you again for your time today. We really appreciate it.
You're very welcome, sir. It's always my pleasure.
All right. Thank you. My brother.